Hello, this is a recording of the webinar titled The Unanticipated Role of the Decision Model in Data Quality, Active Business Governance. It was brought to you by Knowledge Partners International, the thought leader in the field of business process management, decision modeling, and requirements. The webinar is presented by Barbara von Halle. She is one of our managing partners and founder of Knowledge Partners International. Barbara is co-inventor of the decision model and co-author of the book The Decision Model: A Business Logic Framework Linking Business and Technology, published by Taylor and Francis in 2009. She is the fifth recipient of the Outstanding Individual Achievement Award from Data Management International, also known as DEMA, the premier organization for data professionals worldwide. Barbara was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1995. She's an early pioneer in data architecture and business rules. Barbara co-authors the monthly decision model column in www.modernanalyst.com and serves as QA consultant on Sapiens Decision Software, KPI's decision modeling and requirements projects. Her first book, Handbook of Relational Database Design, has sold over 21,000 copies. She was the most popular in Database Programming and Design magazine for years and continues to impact the further development of the decision model as it advances in collaboration with clients in our consulting ecosystem.
At MIT in Cambridge from July 17th to July 20th. What was exciting about the conference is apparently they had record attendance, including people who registered from 14 different countries. So certainly that tells us that data quality remains a critical issue, and both in the government sector of the world and of major corporations. This was actually the third year we were requested to come and present at the conference, and this year I was also asked to participate in a panel on the human side of data quality. And to be honest with you, it was the first time we actually presented a formal presentation on the use of the decision model for data quality initiatives. And my presentation was very well attended, and it was such a pleasure to meet a lot of data professionals who sat through the presentation and had a lot of outstanding questions about the use of the decision model in this regard. And so with that in mind, I welcome you folks to this presentation on the use of the decision model for data quality. It is based a lot on the MIT presentation with maybe a little bit more detail. And one of the things I told the folks at MIT that's unique about this presentation is that it's a little bit embarrassing for Larry and myself. So let me explain that to you. When Larry and I first introduced the decision model to the public, we did so in our book in 2009, and we had already had many years of experience, about 4 years of experience with the decision model with our clients, but we never intended the decision model to be used for data quality initiatives. In fact, we outrightly advised against doing so. And luckily for us, some of our clients didn't believe us, and they insisted on testing the usefulness of the decision model with respect to data quality logic and enforcing it. And because these endeavors have been very successful, and because that's a large part of our business today, I thought it would be interesting to you folks to see a different kind of a presentation that will present to you a practical and proven technique for how our clients are using the decision model in the data quality part of their business. So the title of this presentation is The Unanticipated Role of the Decision Model in Data Quality, but the most interesting part is its subtitle. The subtitle is Active Business Governance. And that is really where our approach and this corresponding software has a strong point there. Using the decision model and also using the decision product, data stewards are able to control and deliver the data quality logic from initial specification through to deployment. So in other words, the business governance that we're talking about does not stop simply with the creation of decision models. It continues with the ability to make changes later as needed without having a technical background. It means validating the data quality logic by detecting all the logic errors. And it also means executing that logic against test data so that by the time it's put into production, we know that it's correct. So this combination provides chief data officers and business stewards with a new weapon in the battle for higher data quality. So what I want to cover today are these few bullets here. And I know that some of you, about half of you, have knowledge or experience with the decision model already, but I also know that about half of you do not. And so for those of you who do not, the first two bullets are a short summary of why we need the decision model and what it looks like. So if you're new to the decision model and you want more details, I recommend our book. It explains the decision model in excruciating detail, but it also does so at a summary level, so you can choose your level of knowledge. But I will tell you, the one thing the book does not address is how to use the decision model for data quality. And so that's the biggest focus of this presentation. So to get started then, you need to understand why Larry and I were driven to develop the decision model in the first place. So to do that, let's look at the world of business rules and business process management before the decision model existed. So some of you have seen this before, and I'm sure you've seen models, process models that look much like this. This is actually from a real client, and even though you can't read it, you can get the general nature of the process model. So in a nutshell, this process model has tasks, which are the boxes. It has flows. It has gateways and pointers to the business rules. So the point of this model is that the business rules themselves are not in the process model. They are separated, and the pointers point to them someplace else. So by separating, we mean the rules themselves are either in a business rule repository product, they're in a rule catalog, maybe you've put them in a requirements tool, or maybe you've put them in a database. Now, obviously, this is much better than burying the business rules as comments or hidden notes behind the process tasks. So the good news is that this process model separates the business rules from the process by pointing to them, and this means that we can create the business rules separately than we create the process model. They have their own deliverable. So I suspect this is probably much like process models you've seen or you've created, and I have to be honest, it looks like many of the ones we have created in the past. But over the years, we realized in doing this practice that the separation of business rules alone is not sufficient. They become unmanageable even though we've separated them. The process model continues to remain complex, sometimes because of the business rules. They are loosely or inconsistently organized. People argue over how to write the business rules, what kind of grammar to use, whether they need to point to an object model or a data model. And that's why the title of this page asks if this is all too familiar and if it is acceptable. Now, I know we have quite a few data people in the audience, and so I think if you've been through the data evolution since the 70s, this will feel a little bit familiar. This was exactly how we managed data a few decades ago. We used to create a list of data elements in a data dictionary, and we used to reference them in our process models, in decomposition diagrams, data flow diagrams, whatever the diagrams of the day were. But this didn't work too well for data either. It was only when the relational model was introduced and that we now had a universal, rigorous, and superior way to manage data that we could leverage it completely and fully. So Larry and I stood back and asked ourselves sometime around 2004, can we come up with such a model for business rules and business logic? And would such a model help us optimize our process deliverables by going beyond just separation, but to actually creating a different kind of a model, and therefore deliver the business rules as a true and modeled business asset? It's the same way we data professionals have been able to do with the data. So this page illustrates at a glance how we introduce the decision model to the same process model you saw on the previous page. In fact, this process model was recreated with the decision model in mind. So you'll notice a few things about it. First of all, there are fewer task boxes, and the pointers to the business rules are gone. And what you see in 4 of these task boxes, or actually 5 of them, you see the little blue, looks like a circle, but it's really an octagon. And that little icon indicates that those particular task boxes have behind them an entire model of the business rules that are guiding that task. It's almost like saying that that task may also have a whole data model behind it. Maybe it's customer and order data. So this is the logic behind exactly what that task box is doing. So there are two advantages to doing this besides the fact that the diagram looks simple. The first is you can now deliver more generic processes, because often the only difference in one process model to another are the business rules that you're executing. So you could have decision models for the state of New Jersey and another set of decision models for the state of Texas in the United States, but you could have the same process. And when it gets to that particular task box, it simply calls the appropriate decision model. The second advantage is the ability to deliver the reusable decision models. So in other words, an entire decision model can also become reusable in a whole other business process model. That's one of the advantages of the data quality usage of a decision model, because we can create decision models for data quality checks, and those decision models can be used everywhere. And so before we get to that part, we want to stop and say, well, where are their business rules? How do they become so reusable, and how does the process model become so simple? So the business rules are now in the model of their own, and we call this model the decision model. We did not call it a business rule model. There are lots of people claiming to have business rule models, and everybody has a different definition of business rule. But we wanted to focus on something bigger than the individual business rules. So we created this model called a decision model. The blue icons in the two task boxes on the left now are pointing to decision models on the right-hand side of the page, and you can see two of them there. Each of these decision models, and you'll see a few more, starts with the blue icon, which is really the octagon, and that blue icon is connected to a set of green shapes below it. So in a data world, you can think of those as data entities, but in the decision model world, we call those rule families. They are very rigorous, normalized collections of business rule logic that are organized into a family, if you will, a normalized family. We call the diagram a decision model diagram, just like you have a data model diagram. And you can see that these rule families are related to each other because there appear to be lines between them. And this is the same way a data model, a data entity is related to another one. In a data model, you have referential integrity arrows, and in a decision model, you have what we call inferential relationship lines. They're not data relationships, they're logic relationships. So they have a slightly different name, but they kind of serve the same purpose. In the center of the page, we have something called rule family structure, and all that is I just took one of those green tablet shapes and blew it up so you could actually read the words that are inside of it. And this one has four things inside of it, like policy, renewal method, policy pricing within bounds, etc. And if you notice carefully, one of them is listed above a solid line. Two of them are between the solid line and the dotted line, and the manual underwriting indicator is below the dotted line. So let's take a look at what those mean and why we do that. At the bottom now of the page is what we call the rule family content, or the rule family table. So the one you're seeing with here on this page is the rule family content for the rule family structure or icon above it. So let's take a look at the content of the structure, and then I'll point out to you how that structure relates to the table below. So the first thing you'll notice that the words above the solid line in the rule family structure, which is policy renewal method, have become the heading for the conclusion column in the rule family content below. So you know that the very top thing becomes the conclusion. The other three sets of words, the policy pricing within bounds to the manual underwriter indicator, have become the headings for the condition columns in the rule family content or table. So now we need to think about, why are two of those in the structure, why are two of those between the lines and one of them beneath the line? Before I go into that, I just want to give you a brief comparison of the decision model and the relational model, because it is kind of interesting. This page points out four of the differences and just ends up with similarities and ends up with the differences. So the first similarity is each model defines a technology-independent way of organizing an important intangible or intellectual asset. And these assets are data for the relational model and the logic of business rules for the decision model. The second similarity is it turns out that both models are easily implemented in technology. This is really, really important because that's not so true of the way we managed business rules before necessarily. The relational model gave way to relational DBMS products, which made the automation straightforward. The decision model already easily implements into the business rule management systems of today. But more importantly, it has already paved the way for a new generation of software, just like the relational model did. And this new generation is called a business decision management system, not just business rules, but business decision management. And we'll talk a little bit more about, you'll see what the decisions are. Sapiens Decision, in our opinion, is the first offering of this kind because it completely supports the notion of decision and the notion of the integrity and the normalization of every single rule family that appears in one whole decision model. And so it supports all of the decision model principles. The third similarity is that both models solve an important unsolved problem of its day: the inability to effectively manage data back in the 70s and the inability to effectively manage business rule logic today. And both models also adhere to three features of technology-independent models. They both have a very simple structure to follow and interpret. They are both declarative in nature, which means they can execute in any technology of any kind. And they also have principles that define the integrity of the data in the data model and the logic in the decision model, including normalization principles. Both of them have normalization principles. Those principles are similar between the models, but obviously one relates to data and one relates to logic. And the similarities are interesting, but the differences are even more intriguing. We had a lot of discussions about them in coming up with the model. And for those of you who are interested in the differences, we have an entire chapter in our book that compares these two models in depth and how we arrived at the different pieces of the decision model. So let's move on to maybe a more practical topic: is what does a decision model really look like for those of you who haven't seen them? And specifically, let's look at the diagram so that you can understand the placement of those conditions. Why one is some of them are between the solid line and the dotted line, and why some of them are below the line. So here you see something you already know, that the decision model starts with a decision icon at the top. And in it is the name of a business decision whose conclusion we are seeking. It's important to know that a decision model is seeking the answer to only one conclusion. That's what makes them atomic, and that's what makes them reusable. And the way we name a decision, it starts with a decision word like determine or assess or validate. And the second part of it is the name of the conclusion we are seeking. So this one says determine policy renewal method. So we are seeking what is the method of renewal for a particular insurance policy. We can assume in this case that the policy is either automatically renewed through this automated system, or perhaps the second option is that it needs to be manually renewed through the underwriters. So the decision octagon always connects to one and only rule family, which is shown right on this page, and that one has a special name. It's called the decision rule family because it actually has as its conclusion, it has the conclusion that the whole model is looking for. So you'll see the policy renewal method in the octagon as well as in the decision rule family. Below the conclusion, you already know, are the conditions, and here are the three conditions we were looking at before. So now let's take a look at what this means. In this decision rule family, two of the conditions are placed below the solid line and above the dotted line. What this means is each of these has a supporting rule family, and a supporting rule family is simply another rule family in which this condition appears as a conclusion column. In other words, each of these two conditions are the output of another rule family. So you're going to see two branches pop out of this model. This decision rule family also has one condition below the dotted line, and all that means is this particular condition gets its values from raw data. The data either comes from a website or comes from a database or a file, and so we don't have any logic or any conclusion that we need in order to know what the manual underwriting indicator is. It just simply is persistent or raw data. So you already know that behind each of these rule family shapes in the decision model diagram, you will have its rule family table. And then you know now that the conclusion column is what's listed on the top, and the others are the conditions. But now you'll also notice that the conditions that are between the lines in the green rule family tablet have underlines in them in the rule family table. And that's really a link to tell you that these two have their own rule family. And so because the decision rule family, the same one we were looking at, has two conditions between the solid and dotted line, now we know it will have two branches, and this page shows only one of them. We will have a branch for policy pricing within bounds, and we will have a branch for policy underwriting risk. And if you look at the rule family tablet on the left-hand side, we know that policy tier is simply raw data, but policy discount, because it's between the lines, will have its own rule family table. And this page simply reminds you that each rule family has its own rule family table. What's actually interesting is we develop them iteratively. We might start with the structure, create some tables, and then just play with the tables and then continue with the structure. So you have a lot of options in how you develop your decision model. Here is a complete decision model diagram. This one has 6 rule families until it finally gets to a level where all of the conditions are below the dotted line. Now, that means that we're finished. We don't have any more conditions between the lines that we have to create supporting rule families for. So that tells you how it's when it's finished. We know when we're finished. Any decision model can be implemented as a service. If you were to implement this decision model as a service, and remember, the only thing it does is tell you the policy renewal method. The data that the service needs is all of the data elements or conditions below all of the dotted lines. That's the data that goes into the service. So it's very well defined and very well bound. So you might be wondering how large decision models tend to be. So let me tell you what we've learned in the last few years of experience. We find 3 different sizes. We find small, and medium, and then complex. And the smallest of decision models are a single rule family, which is the decision rule family containing only a few rows. Medium-sized decision models usually consist of 10 to 20 rule families with about 5 to 10 rows in each. If you're a data person, think about when you normalize data, you end up with a lot of relational tables that have fewer columns in them than if you created a non-normalized relational table. And most medium-sized decision models fit very nicely on 1 to 3 printed pages. Complex decision models, however, can be hundreds of rule families, sometimes 5 to 20 rows each. Now, the good news for a lot of you is that most decision models are either small or medium. The interesting conclusion is that data quality decision models tend to be very large. They tend to be large in terms of the number of rule families, but they also tend to be far simpler in their logic than the other kind of decision models. So let me get started on how we've been using the decision model in data quality, because I want you will understand then why these decision models become large. But this is where our embarrassment comes into play. One of us, either myself or Larry, made this quote in our book, and I won't say which one. Data validation rules, which we refer to as data quality logic, ensure that data elements meet certain requirements so that the data is of good quality, right? And we also said data validation rules themselves are typically not part of the decision model, but external to it. We said that because we believe that by the time a task comes into being or executes, by the time it wants to execute a decision model, it assumes it has all the data that it needs and that all that data is high quality. So we weren't totally wrong, but we were partially wrong. So let's take a look at the difference between data quality logic and the business logic that we originally meant the decision model to do. So here's the difference. Data quality logic, we say, is the logic used against data elements to determine if they are valid with respect to various data quality dimensions. So these can include completeness, which means, do I have all the data? Is everything populated that I need? And if it is, does it meet reasonableness checks, accuracy checks, etc.? So the example here is data quality logic is the kind of logic that we use to determine if a particular address is actually a valid address or not, right? But on the other hand, business logic is something else. Business logic is the logic that uses those data elements to come to a business-oriented decision, not a data-oriented decision, but a business-oriented conclusion. So a business-oriented conclusion may be something seeking a compliance decision or eligibility decision, but it's not really looking at the quality of the data. It's assuming the data is high quality, and now I'm going to use it to make a business decision. And an example is determining whether a particular address, which we already know is valid, whether it's in the neighborhood in which we want to start our newest marketing campaign. So because both data quality logic and business logic are actually logic, they both fit into the decision model format, but they serve very different purposes, right? I already explained the purpose: testing the data for quality and making a business decision. One thing we've learned, and this, of course, you all could figure this out yourself, is if the data is poor quality, our business decisions will make poor quality conclusions. But even if our data is high quality and our business logic in the decision is poor quality, we will still be making poor quality decisions. So basically, data quality and business logic go together hand in hand. They're sort of, two sides of the same coin. Okay, so let's take a look at how we use decision models in a data quality way. So what Larry and I said was we were correct that DQ logic does not belong in the same decision model as business logic belongs, but we were wrong in saying that it does not belong in any decision model. So what we want to do is understand where we can use the decision model and a process model that checks data quality logic. So this page shows that separation, and it shows it in two different examples. In the first example, the first task checks for completeness, and you can tell that by our naming conventions. So it says here, determine insurance claim data quality complete. Well, that's the way we're saying we're looking at an insurance claim and we're checking the data quality dimension of completeness. And after it determines that we have all the data that we need, the process model then executes three other DQ decision models, the top one being accuracy, the middle one being consistency, and the bottom one being reasonableness. So once I have all the data and I know it's there, I'm going to check those dimensions, and if they're good, I'm going to continue to the process where I'm going to use that data for processing that claim. In example 2, we do it slightly differently. The first task checks whether all the required data is there, so we have the completeness check, and if it is, it actually executes the others in a particular sequence. So depending on the logic, you can either have them execute in parallel if they have nothing to do with each other, or there may be business reasons for doing them in sequence. But the two important things are we have to check for completeness first, and we do all the DQ checks before we do any other kind of decision model that needs the data. So what does this decision model look like? Oops, we're going to look at the completeness check. So let's see what that looks like. That's the first task in the process model. So let's take a look at this. You know a little bit how to read a decision model. So the decision icon at the top of this page tells you that this decision model determines whether the data for an insurance claim satisfies the DQ dimension of completeness. In other words, are all the required data fields populated? In the top rule family, you see 4 conditions between the solid and the dotted line. And each one of these contains the word complete. So what that means is we are testing whether the insurance claim type is complete, whether the auto license plate number is complete, whether the insurance claim amount is complete, etc. And so because these are between those 2 lines, you see below there we have an independent or a supporting rule family for each of those data elements. And in those bottom rule families, we have the logic that checks for completeness. So if you look at the one on the left that looks at an insurance claim type DQ complete, it has input as its only input the insurance claim type, and if you were to click on that in software, you would see that this is where it tests whether or not there's a value in that field. So let's take a look at what the rule families actually look like, because that might make it a little bit clearer. Okay, so the top rule family here is the decision rule family, and notice what it does. It checks whether the insurance claim type is complete, and if it is, and the auto license plate number is complete, and the claim amount is complete, and whatever else we need to be complete. If all of them are complete, we say that the claim passes the completeness check. If any of them are not complete, then it does not pass that test. So the individual tables below tell you what it means for each of those data elements to be complete. So obviously the first one, we're just checking whether it's populated or not. And the second one it's a little bit more complicated. We're saying if it's an auto claim type and we have the license plate number, then the license plate number is complete, right? But if it's an auto claim type and we don't have it, it's not complete, right? If it's not auto and it's populated, there's something wrong. So we say the completeness check is weird, etc. So basically, we end up with a dependent rule family for each data element for each data quality dimension that you need to test. So here we have a little notation here. The claim type is always required. We're just checking for populated. We use the word populated. That's sort of a keyword in decision models because business people don't like the word null. So we use words that they like. And then the auto license plate number is conditional. So we can have all kinds of conditional logic in these DQ rule families. Okay, so that's completeness. Let's take a look at consistency. Now we're going to go into this particular part of the process model and how are we going to check for consistent. But before we do that, just recall that we've already done or executed the completeness checks in this particular model, and we've also done an accuracy check, whatever that logic is. So here's an example of a decision model that checks for consistency, and notice that it looks quite the same. We have at the top, we're determining for the insurance claim the data quality dimension of consistency. So we have consistent in the name and we have consistent in the decision rule family, and each of those elements that needs to pass consistency checks has its own supporting rule family. And you can see here that these rule families at the bottom are a little bit more involved because consistency is not just checking that we have things populated that are related. They have to be populated with more logic. So I presume where the leftmost supporting rule family, it looks like my input is the insurance claim date and the incident date, and obviously there has to be a relationship between those two, not just that they're populated. And so, so this is sort of basically you get a feeling for what your data quality decision models look like. You're going to have rule families for just about every single element for every single dimension that you want to check for that element. So those of you in data quality know these can get quite large. Now, for those of you who need more time to absorb that, we'll be sending you a link for this, and we'll be sending you the presentation. But here's another option, which is what I call the super duper data quality option. Here's another way to do it. You can have a process model that contains a task for completeness, which is on the very first task and has the octagon in there for completeness, followed by only one data quality task. And that data quality task is a super duper decision model because that's going to check all the other dimensions for all of the other data elements. So if you're wondering what that super duper decision model looks like, it's not as crazy as you might think. It's a little bit large, but it's not as crazy as you might think. So here, let's take a look at this. The decision rule family has insurance claim. It checks consistency and reasonableness and accuracy. And so then it's going to have a branch for each of these. It has a branch for consistency, a branch for reasonableness, and a branch for accuracy. And underneath those, all of the elements that need to be tested for those dimensions have their own dependent rule family. And so that's how it goes. Data quality decision models are large. They have lots of rule families, but the logic is not the same as the logic for determining if someone's eligible for a mortgage, for example. The logic tends to be a lot simpler, although I'm sure I'm going to eat my words. I'm sure you have a lot of data quality logic that is more complicated that I'm showing you. So now you can see how DQ data models become large, but also keep in mind that you don't have to put them all into one decision model like we did on this page. So that's sort of part of the, part of the design, if you will, is when to separate them into separate make each branch its own decision model. How many branches do you need? And a lot of that has to do with your business processes and the way the data is used throughout the organization. But at least it gives you a visual. It gives you a visual picture of your data quality logic. And here's the good news, by the way. We have found in practice that business people who function as business data stewards can understand these models, and they are able to validate that the logic is good and to change it whenever it's needed So we've been working with the mortgage industry, for example, and things like, whether your property value is a reasonable amount, changes often, right? But they're able to make those reasonableness checks and change them as they need them. They can also test them against test data, so that's very nice. So let me close with an actual case study which involved DQ logic, so you can understand the deliverables, the productivity, and the ROI. This was a real-world crisis at an organization, a major financial institution, who was unable to process batch transactions in the time allowed, and mostly because of data quality errors. So they couldn't, and the volumes were increasing and increasing, and they didn't always get messages with all the data quality errors. And so they wanted to know if the decision model would solve the problem. We didn't really know. We took a look at the processes. We tried to understand where data quality checks needed to be done. We came up with the data quality decision models as well as the business-oriented decision models, and we averted the crisis. And now, instead of taking 30 or 90 hours, this probably is even faster now, it became 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And this took us 10 to 12 weeks to do. So how did we do it? What did we deliver? We simplified the process models, or optimized them, just by removing any task boxes that had to do with data quality logic other than a whole decision model. That whole process just involved 5 decision models. Isn't that interesting? The total rule families was 95. Now, if you're a data modeler, you're thinking, well, I have 5 logical data models with 95 entities. That's not huge. The decision models were built in 5 weeks and programmed another 5 weeks, and they had 2,200 test cases, which were tested in the 2 weeks. So that was our first data quality experience, and we've been actually doing it ever since. But I want to also point out, not only was this interesting from a data point of view, but the governance by business people is potentially a breakthrough. And so if you're using the new generation of software, like a business decision management system that allows you to provide governance for business people, it goes a lot smoother. So let me talk to you briefly with what I mean about that, and then I'll close. This is a screenshot from Sapiens Decision, and basically it's just showing you that you can customize and enforce governance, starting with business people and going all the way through to IT. And the governance workflow, actually you can specify it for the business decision models as well as the data quality decision models. So what that means is that each business initiative or decision model can have its own governance workflow, because even the data, right? Even data stewardship, different pieces of data, different parts of data should have a different business steward. And the same thing with the business decisions. And so you can customize these all the way through to testing and then to passing it on to IT for support. So I want to leave you with 3 important points before I turn this over to Michael and we open it up for questions. Okay, these are the 3 points I'd like you to take away. The first one is, please ignore everything that Larry and I said about not using decision models for data quality logic. I think we have egg on our face in that regard, and everybody laughs at us about that. And Larry and I weren't even part of the first data quality project. In fact, one of the first data quality projects was done by a college intern, not from us, one of our clients. Second lesson learned, do not mix data quality logic and true business logic in the same decision model. And if you do that, you create unnecessarily complex decision models. You have them all mixed up together, and it also doesn't deliver your data quality logic in a shareable form, because it's all mixed up with mortgage logic, or it's all mixed up with claim logic, and then you can't really use it in another part of the business. Doing that also makes governance difficult, because I bet in your organization, you probably know this better than I do, the people in the organization who are the stewards over data and data quality are not the same people who are stewards over the decisions that use that data. So there are people who should be governing, let's say, the claim data, and then there are other people, or let's say the membership data, and someone else should be governing the use of that data in determining different business decisions using it. And the third, which you've already seen, the third lesson learned is, be sure that your data quality decision models will execute before decision models of business logic that use that data. In other words, no decision model using a business logic should ever execute until it knows or until it has all the data that it needs and all of the data is of the quality that it needs it to be. And that way we actually, by doing these separate models, you actually really get a visual picture of your data quality logic and the decisions logic that uses that data across your enterprise. So you're actually delivering data quality logic and business logic as a true business asset, and they can be changed independently of each other. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Barbara. That was very, very interesting. Before we open the floor for questions, I just want to give you an information about our business model. And I have a slide here. Barbara, can you see my slide?
I can.
Excellent. So what you see here at the slide is our engagement model that consists basically of a couple of different elements. One is the skill and the knowledge transfer, which is the focus of what we are doing. And that includes the training, certification, mentoring, and if the client is interested in that, building a center of excellence. Now, the typical approach is that we would come into the company and have a initial training of the team, but also of the decision makers, and then start a pilot project and do scoping. Now, I have to say, recent experiences with large financial services institutions have shown that in an agile environment, we're able to expedite the process and also adjust it to their particular agile environment. So, but in general, we would have the training. We would show how to decision model with an example, and then use that also for the scoping purpose. As an end result, you would have the approach and plan and the level of effort estimate for the target project, which could then require a number of what we call sprints. And those sprints would be 3 months engagements, up to 3 months engagements at the client, where the client is taking more and more responsibility, and our team is supporting them in the area of decision modeling. Now, I also have to mention that in most of the projects, we actually start first with business process management and helping our clients to separate the sequential from declarative information. That's very important. So if you have a business process project, please consider us and bring us in early, because it will help to simplify or to optimize the process in the project. Now, these sprints, this is just a mock-up here. Doesn't have to be 3 or doesn't have to be 2. Typically, you would need about 3 months in a project to be eligible to be certified as a practitioner. So the certification is quite strict, but with that you have a real high value. We see that with our clients that are now expanding throughout the enterprise and have many certified decision modelers in the enterprise. Now, at the end of a project, when the client is fairly self-sufficient, we offer a stepment approach. Stepment is mentoring. Our expert will be most of the time offsite, and with that, the client has an opportunity to run the project by themselves and have basically KPI as a quality insurance or support if they run into specific issues, challenges. Now, one thing is the skills and the knowledge transfer, but we see it's more and more important to have also tools that are incorporating the decision model and also facilitating whatever you have created there. And as you all can imagine, in particular when it comes to maintenance, it's important to have an enterprise-grade tool that helps you to manage glossaries, supports testing, is strong in compliance, and is also able to manage business logic at different locations. So at the beginning, typically we provide the tools, and then that leads to a point in time when you will start to select a business decision management system that works for you, and then parallel to the training and skills transfer, there is an implementation of a business decision management system to automate your process, your business logic within your existing infrastructure. And the automation typically entails an integration with one or many business rules engines that are already in place at the client or that you're intending to deploy. Now, this is just a quick overview of the engagement model, but I would like to open the floor right now for questions. So please, if you have questions, if you could send us the message so that I can ask Barbara. Barbara, Antje asked one question in terms of the condition value, right? And she said, so it is assumed that for each condition of a value, that for each condition a value is required, whether the value meets format, length, etc. requirements. Barbara, can you hear us?
Sorry, Michael, I muted while you were talking. I didn't quite understand the question. You said that the question is if a condition value is required, but it doesn't have to meet certain dimensions?
So it's basically, she mentioned that it is assumed that for each condition, a value is required.
Okay.
Whether the value meets format, length, etc.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in other words, you want it. Yeah, so how would we do that? We would use and in the decision model, we use the keyword populated, saying if this value is populated or not populated. And that will tell us whether the data, if it's required, it has to be populated. Then whether it meets a particular length or anything else is a different data quality dimension. Okay, so whether it's there or not is a completeness check. Whether it fits any other requirement is another check. But if the length, if you don't care about the length, then you don't have another check that checks that.
Right. Very good. There's I hope we were able to answer Antje's question, and then the other one that is just coming in from Antari Kasha. I hope I didn't watch this name. Could you please suggest if there is any tool which is good for data quality decision modeling?
That's a great question. Personally, I would use Sapiens Decision Product, and let me just tell you why. Besides the fact that they're a partner, but because it's business focused. In other words, I didn't go all through how to build decision models, but for example, business people can name their columns the way they want to name them. They don't have to follow standard naming conventions. And if you're a data person, I know that's like scratching your nails on a blackboard, because it was for me. But using this product, they don't have to solidify their names. They just get the logic right. And then you can go in before these models can be submitted for approval in the governance workflow. Then they have to have the standard names and standard definitions. But before then, the business people can work as fast as they want to work without being hampered by that. And also because it will automatically generate test cases for you to test the logic. So that means, and find all the logic errors, and all that will happen before you need to turn it over to IT. So I think it's a really great tool. In terms of deployment, where are you going to automate that data quality logic? Okay, Decision has adapters for different technologies, such as for Drools or IBM's iLog, but you can automate it however you automate it today. You know, if you write your own triggers and stored procedures or ETL or whatever, you can still do that, but it just follows the governance life cycle. So I would take a look at Decision myself, is what I would do. If anyone knows of any other products that they're using, please feel free to send us an email and we'll share it with folks.
Okay, very good. Antje had a follow-up on the answer, and she said just because a value is not populated doesn't mean it must be there to pass the completion check. how or where do required and optional values fit within rule families and the decision model?
Okay, that's a really okay. I didn't understand her question. Okay, so what you're saying is not everything on a claim, for instance, is required. So what we have is a completeness check for all those that are required, and then we have other decision models that are conditional. They may be conditional depending on what you want to do with that claim, right? So some of the data is the core data, and it must be there. And other data, you'll have other decision models or rule families that will say for this particular data quality dimension, it's acceptable as a precursor to another task, but it's not acceptable as the precursor to a different task. So we do. What you're saying, it's conditionally populated. It's not always mandatory, and we do. I didn't show details, but if you want to send me an email about it, maybe I can do a better job explaining that. But it's the same way we do even regular decision models when something is conditional or not. It just makes the decision model, the data quality decision models, a little more complex. But not everything is mandatory all the time.
Very good. There is also another question coming in. Are there other ways the decision model can help with data management?
My tendency is to say whatever Larry and I say, don't believe us, because it wasn't what we intended it to do. But one of the things I've learned that's really interesting as a data person is we do the decision model based on a glossary. We do not require that these data elements already exist in a database, or even if they exist in an object model or a data model. That is not a requirement from a business person's point of view. So I think even using the glossary capability and tying it in the background to data sources or object models is useful. But in software, for instance, in Decision, we have a federated glossary. We create communities with federated glossaries where glossaries link to each other so our decision models can be shared, or we can see a decision model using different glossaries. To me, I'm not sure. I think that's something we did for business decisions of different communities, but I think that whole glossary hierarchy and community concept is useful for other data management incentives. So I think part of some of this software that's coming out, part of it is very useful for data people, even if they don't do the decision modeling part.
Okay. There's another question that says, in the business logic decision model, we have used XSD validation to filter data. Can we call this as a data quality decision model?
I'm not familiar with SSB, but if you can take the logic that's in it and put it in decision model form, I wouldn't see why not. If you can put it in condition to conclusion according to normalization principles, I would say yes. The decision model is technology agnostic, but it's not rigor agnostic. It's sort of like, can I take customer data and put it in a relational table? Or can I put customer data that's in a hierarchy and put it in relational tables? Yes, as long as you follow what the definition and requirements are of relational. And the same thing with the decision model. There are certain things you can have only one conclusion and all the conditions are ANDed. All those principles, if you can express it that way, yes, of course, it fits into a decision model. If you can't express it that way, it would not be a decision model. It would be something else. It might be a process flow or something like that.
And since we are almost, we're at the end of the time, but there's a last question. What is the most difficult part of creating decision models?
Oh, that's easy. The most difficult part of creating decision models is the glossary, is actually naming the condition and conclusion columns and giving them a definition and domain values that people can use, that decision models can use. As data people, which a lot of you are, there's a lot of emotion about that. There's a lot of different standards out there, and we always have a glossary administrator on every single project who is either from the data community or is the liaison to the data community. So that is the hardest part. Coming up with the logic is really the easy part. It's the fun part, and the conclusions and all that. But coming up with the names and enforcing, and definitions and sharing them across the enterprise, that's the hard part.
Excellent. That brings us to the end of our questions today. I will now continue with a repeat of the slides related to how to learn more about the decision model for all those that have not seen them and that are interested now how to get more information about the decision model, but also there is a short information about upcoming events such as exhibitions and webinars. Barbara, thank you so much. As always, it was a pleasure, and I hope we can see the participants at the next webinar. So, how to learn more about the decision model? Barbara mentioned the book. We have it available as a Kindle version, but also hardcover. It's definitely the best way to get an overview. If you're not ready to buy the book, or if you want to get some latest articles about the decision model or recordings of webinars, or use our library of white papers and templates, please feel free to visit our webpage. We have two sites. One is www.thedecisionmodel.com, and the second one is www.kpiusa.com. Then you find us regularly at leading industry publications such as the Data Administration Newsletter, TDM, Modern Analyst, or the Requirements Network. And in addition, you can learn more about the decision model by attending educational events brought to you by our partners, such as B2T Training. B2T Training is a founding member of the IIBA, has a great tradition in and experience in training business analysts. The BPM Institute, with its 4 events in the US, in San Francisco, Chicago, DC, and in New York. So DC is coming up in September. We have international partners such as Acinta. Acinta is located in the UK. Good Methods Global, it's a partner for us in the area of visualization services that are part of our requirements solution. Rule Management Group in the Netherlands, and a Strand in Donsland in Denmark. And of course, our software partner Sapiens. Sapiens has developed a software solution, enterprise-grade business decision management system that incorporates all 15 principles as outlined in a book, but also the latest further developments that we have created together with our clients. So today, Sapiens is a true collaboration between their IT department and our thought leaders. They have a very strong pedigree in the field of financial services, with many leading clients in that field, and they have a great experience and a great knowledge in linking a third party elements such as business rules engines to decision, which is very helpful since this application is technology independent. Then come and join LinkedIn. We have 2 groups, the Decision Model group and the Decision Model News group. The difference between the 2 groups is that the Decision Model group serves as a networking platform for people that are interested to collaborate or exchange information related to the decision model. We have the originators of the decision model often join the discussion, but there are also a lot of people that are using the decision model and are sharing their experiences. The decision model news group is more a marketing vehicle for us to announce events and where we are speaking, where we are presenting. Yeah, it would be great to see you at one of those or at both. Then announcements, upcoming events. There's a webinar on August 16th about Sapiens Decision. Please don't miss that. It will be very interesting. At the same time, 12 to 1 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. And we have a webinar upcoming with Barbara titled Why Decision Tables Are Not Enough, from Decision Tables to Decision Models. I think that would be is a very interesting topic. It's on August 28th, also again 12 to 1 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. Then we have a webinar coming up with Larry Goldberg titled What You Need to Know About the Decision Model. This webinar is presented on October 17th, also 12 to 1 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. And this is a webinar that focuses on the background to the decision model, how it came to be, but also gives a hands-on overview how it works, and it's ideal for people that haven't had a lot of exposure to the decision model prior. Then, as I mentioned earlier, you can find us at the upcoming brainstorm in Washington. We have 2 training slots there, and you can register online at the BPM Institute. We have also training partner B2T will present or will host a 2-day training class in Atlanta, October 23rd to 24th. So if you have time, register early. These classes are filling up quite quickly. Same applies to a Cintas decision modeling essential course in Watford, UK. It's just a little bit outside of London. It happens very soon, August 22nd to the 23rd. And you can find more information at Acinta Systems webpage. That's in particular interesting for all the participants from Europe. Then you can meet us at the Mortgage Bankers Association's 99th Annual Convention Expo. We will be exhibiting October 21st to 24th together with our software partner Sapiens. And we are also co-exhibiting with Sapiens at the Building Business Capability event in Fort Lauderdale. So it's a good time to meet, especially for all the people who are from the north. This event will take place October 28th to October 1st, and it's a great networking event. We will be there with Sapiens. We will be able to show you the application, and some of our clients will also be there. So if you are interested to network with some of our experts and clients, this is the place to meet. This brings me to the end of the webinar. Thank you so much for attending. I hope you will register soon for the upcoming webinars. And if you have any questions, please send an email to Barbara von Halle or I. You will find contact information on our website. Thank you so much and have a great day.